the leaf may need more number of nutrients when compared to the stem. So therefore, stem might act as a source and the leaf might become a sink. On the other hand, leaf might act as a source and the stem might act like a sink. In phloem, we know that it is made up of different types of elements called as the companion cells, the sieve tube elements and all that. Two factors are very important. One is the turgor pressure, or it is also called as the hydrostatic pressure. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to the last session of chapter 11, that is Transport in Plants. I am Dr. Divya, Biology Faculty, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Mysuru, Temple of Excellence. So in the previous session, we had discussed about the uptake of mineral ions by the plants, wherein we studied how two factors are very important for the transport of mineral ions. And also we studied how the mineral ions travels from the soil into the root hair, then to the epidermal cells, and then into the cytoplasm of the epidermal cells, and from there how they enter into the endodermis, wherein the transport proteins decides how much quantity and what type of ions has to move into the xylem, and from there how it travels through different parts of the plant body. In today's session, we shall discuss how phloem helps in the transport of solutes from the source to the sink. And for this, we shall study about an important hypothesis called as the pressure flow hypothesis or the mass flow hypothesis. And we shall also study about an important experiment to support that particular hypothesis, which is called as the Girdling Experiment. So to begin with, we shall start with phloem transport, that is how phloem helps in the transport of solute from the source to the sink. So what is the source and what is the sink? So here we shall consider the photosynthesis. So when plants photosynthesize, we know that plants make use of carbon dioxide and water and also sunlight's energy, which is trapped by the chlorophyll pigment, and therefore carbon dioxide and water gets converted into glucose, which is the food source for the plant. Right. So where is this glucose actually produced? It is produced in the leaf part. So therefore the leaves are the source. So from the leaves they have to get transported to other cells, which is the sink. So from the source to the sink, how do they get transported? So here, and we should always remember that the glucose cannot be transported as such in the plants. Therefore, the glucose has to be converted into sucrose, and it is the sucrose that actually travels from the source to the sink. So, food, especially sucrose. Why sucrose? Because I told you glucose cannot travel. So, therefore, in the plant leaves, glucose get converted into sucrose and then they actually travel. So, the food, which is primarily in the form of sucrose, is transported by the vascular tissue, which is phloem. So, we are talking about the food source here, right? So far, we were talking about water and mineral ions. Now, we are talking about the food source, that is sucrose, which is transported from the vascular tissue. So, the vascular tissue that is present in the leaf, it is nothing but the phloem, which is a source. So, why is it a source? Because it is having the sucrose. It is the source. So, source, say for example, you have a bag full of beads. That beads, it is a source now. So, what is the source? A bag full of beads. That you are putting it into something else, maybe an empty basket. That empty basket is the sink because their beads are not there. It is the sink. So, from the source, from that gunny bag full of beads, you're from the source or you're transferring it into the sink, which is the basket. So, now you have understood between the source and the sink. So, here source is the phloem cells which are having the food element, that is the sucrose. It is the source. So, food, primarily sucrose, it is transported by the vascular tissue phloem from the source. So, What is a source? It is the part of the plant which actually synthesizes the food. It is the leaf here. Leaf is the source because it contains the food material, that is glucose, which has been converted into sucrose, and then it is transported to the sink. So sink is the part of the plant that actually needs the food source. What is in need of the food source is the sink here, or the one that stores the food is the sink. So the one that is having the food is the source, that is the leaf, and the one that needs the food, therefore it is accepting the food from the source, is the sink. So now you know difference between the two. So therefore, the source and the sink, sometimes in the plant it can be reversed depending on the season. Sometimes the source can act like a sink and the sink can act like a source. So here we have the source and the sink. In the source, what is there abundant? Sucrose is there. Now the sucrose, will it remain here? If it remains in the source, then what is the point of having lot of sucrose? The sucrose has to travel to other parts of the plant body, right? So it has to travel from the source into the sink. So sucrose will travel from the source into the sink. So sometimes here, what is acting like a source here? It is the leaf. Why leaf is acting like a source? Because leaf is the part of the plant that is actually synthesizing the food. And there the food is being synthesized and there the food is present. Now, the leaf, it should travel to other parts of the plant body, that is other parts, wherever the food is needed. Right? Growing parts of the plant body, wherever the food is needed. So this is again, the source and the sink depends on the season. In some of the season, the source can act like a sink. And in some of the seasons, the sink can act like a source. So that is how. So sometimes the source and the sink may be reversed depending on the season or depending on the need of the plant. Sometimes the leaf may need more number of nutrients when compared to the stem. So therefore, stem might act as a source and the leaf might become a sink. On the other hand, leaf might act as a source and the stem might act like a sink. So that is what is that. So here, sugar that is stored in the roots, it can be mobilized. That is, it can travel and it can become a source of food in the early spring. So here, roots, they actually supply the water and mineral nutrients from the base of the plant to the leaf, right? So here, when water and mineral nutrients are the material there, then root is the source and the leaf is the sink, right? Now in this case, I am talking about the food material, that is sucrose. So here, sucrose, where it is formed in the plant leaf, that is wherein the during photosynthesis, the leaves synthesize glucose and that glucose gets converted into sucrose and it is transported to different parts of the body, including the root. So now here, when I am talking about sucrose, here the plant leaf is the source and the root is the sink. Sometimes what happens in the spring season, that is during the early spring season, what happens? The sugar that will be stored in the, so spring season, here there is falling of the leaves, right? The leaves and all will fall from the plant. So if the leaves are not there on the plant, you might have seen spring season, the plants will look bare without any leaf. Why? Because the leaf and all will fall during the spring season. So when there is no leaf, how will the photosynthesis take place? So the branches and all that should get sucrose if new leaves has to develop, right? During the other season, what happens from the leaf and all, that is leaf is the source now, the sucrose would have traveled to the root, which is the sink. Now in the root, lots of sucrose is there, which is being utilized for various purposes. During spring season, what happens? When the leaf and all is fallen, the source that is in the root, what sucrose is there, it will be transported to the leaf. So that here, the root becomes the source and the leaf becomes the sink. So, sugar stored in the roots may be mobilized or may be transported to become a source of food in the early spring. So, they become a source of food to the leaves during the early spring season. And when the buds of the trees, they act as the sink. So, buds of the trees wherein the young leaf has to develop, they actually act as the sink because they need energy for the growth and development for the photosynthetic to reappear, right? For the photosynthetic apparatus. Why? Because if leaves are not there, photosynthesis will not occur. So that is how the interchangeable between the source and the sink actually takes place depending on the season. So we have understood about that. So here sometimes what did I tell you? The sink cell can be the root. So during the spring season what happens? The root can become the or sink, especially the source cell is the leaf. So during photosynthesis what happens? Glucose will get formed in the source, that is the leaf, and this glucose gets converted into sucrose, and that sucrose will be transported to the sink, that is the root cell. But in the spring season what happens? The leaf will fall off from the plant. There won't be leaf. So when there is no leaf, again if the new leaf has to develop, then the source, the root will become the source. Because here sucrose would have traveled here and lots of sucrose molecules will be present here. So the source will become the root, and from the source the sucrose will travel to the budding region in the branches. Therefore the leaves can develop, and again what will happen? Photosynthesis will start here. Again the leaf will become the source and the root will become the sink. So that is how it is interchangeable. So now we have understood about that. And since the source and the sink relationship is variable, the direction of movement of the sucrose in the phloem can also vary. So sometimes in the phloem they can have upward or downward movement, that is the movement of sucrose can be bidirectional. Why? Because why is it bidirectional in the phloem? Because in some seasons or leaf will act as a source and the root will act as a sink. In some seasons, the root will act as a source and the leaf will act as a sink, right? So therefore, the movement will be bidirectional. In two directions, it can go. So in phloem, one more reason is phloem, they don't have sieve plates. That is, they have sieve plates. That is, they have end walls. So therefore, these sieve plates actually help in bidirectional movement as well. So here you can see the movement is in both the direction, that is upward movement and as well as downward movement. They can be bidirectional from source to sink. And when we talk about xylem, xylem cannot participate in the movement from source to sink. Why? Because only it is unidirectional. So what happens? Say for example, how will the materials move from the root to the leaf? Right? It is not possible if it is xylem. So therefore, in contrast with that of xylem, the movement is always unidirectional. Only upward movement of what? Upward movement. It can't move from the leaf to the root. It can only move from the root to the leaf. That is why water travels through the xylem and food travels through the phloem. Why? Because in the case of phloem, there is bidirectional. So whenever the source and the sink changes, because of bidirectional movement, it is easy for transport of the food materials. So therefore, xylem, since they are unidirectional, they can't participate in the transport of food materials, whereas phloem, since they are bidirectional, they can transport the food materials easily between the source and the sink, and sometimes when the sink acts like a source also, they can change the direction of the movement. So that is why these 2 points we need to remember. And next, therefore, hence, unlike one-way flow of water in transpiration, food in phloem sap can be transported in any required direction because they are bidirectional. It depends on the sink. Say for example, we have the source here, source, then the sink. So from the source, the food can travel to the sink, right? And also sink and source, sometimes if the source is not there or the source is lacking food or sucrose, at that time from the sink also they can travel back to the source. That is bidirectional, right? In one direction and in other direction it can move. That will help only by the phloem. Therefore, transport of food is taken care by the phloem. But xylem can only help from source that is from source to sink only in one direction, that is upward movement. This is the sink. Why? Source is the root, sink is the leaf there in that case. But it cannot travel back from the sink, this cannot convert to source and cannot travel back to the root. It is not possible in the case of xylem. So therefore, phloem is one of the best source for the transport of sugar, because the source and the sink is interchangeable in this particular case. So therefore, phloem sap is mainly, the phloem sap also helps in the transport of water as well as sucrose, but other sugars, hormones and amino acids are also transported and translocated through the phloem. Like phloem can function like the xylem as well. Xylem can only transport water and mineral ions along with that. But phloem can transport food, that is sucrose, as well as water, and apart from that, phloem can also transport other sugars, hormones, amino acids and all that, apart from, like xylem cannot. Xylem can transport, that is mineral ions and water. Why? Because the movement of these particles in xylem is always unidirectional, that is from the upward direction, from the root to the leaf, not backward from the leaf to the root. It will not take place. But phloem can transport all these materials from the root to the leaf and also from the leaf to the root, therefore interchanging the sink and the source. So that is the reason. So next, in order to explain this, that is the movement of food particles or sucrose from the region of, that is from the source to the sink, one important hypothesis was proposed by a scientist called as Munch. M-U-N-C-H, Munch. So this scientist Munch, he proposed a hypothesis or theory called as the pressure flow theory, or it is also called as the mass flow theory. So we shall look into this, what happens in this particular theory. So it was proposed by Munch. So we know that leaf is the source for sucrose, right? So whatever glucose is produced during the process of photosynthesis, so leaf, sunlight will fall on the leaf. This is the sunlight will fall on the leaf, which will be absorbed by the chlorophyll pigments, right? It will be absorbed by the chlorophyll pigments, and it will make use of the carbon dioxide and water along with the sunlight and chlorophyll. They will produce glucose in the leaf, right? Glucose will get produced in the leaf. So this glucose cannot travel through the plant body from the leaf to the root. It cannot travel. So therefore, this glucose will get converted into sucrose in the leaf. And this sucrose will actually travel. So here what happens? Sucrose, it is a food material. It has to travel through the food conducting tissue, that is the phloem, right? And in phloem, we know that it is made up of different types of elements called as the companion cells, the sieve tube elements and all that. So both of these are very important. That is companion cells and sieve tube elements. Companion cells and sieve tube elements. So whatever sucrose is produced in the leaf, it will travel through the mesophyll cells of the leaves, and then it will enter into the phloem, right? In the phloem, first it enters into the companion cells of the phloem. So first, the sucrose that is formed will enter into the companion cells of the phloem. And then from the companion cells of the phloem, it will travel passively to the sieve tube elements. That is why passive transport, because here it is traveling from a region of higher concentration to a region of the lower concentration, right? It is traveling passively. And also, how do they travel? How do they move? They move through plasmodesmatal connection, because we know that from one cell to another, there is a narrow channel-like or network-like tube-like structures which connects two cells. right? And they help in the transport of materials from one cell to the other cell. So those are called as plasmodesmatal network or plasmodesmatal connection. So through the plasmodesmatal connection, from the companion cell, the sucrose move into the sieve tube elements by a passive transport. Here energy is not needed because it is moving from a region of higher concentration to region of lower concentration. So energy is not needed here. So next what happens, once all the sucrose travels from the companion cells to the sieve tubes elements, it will increase the osmolarity of the sieve tube elements. Why? Because sucrose gets loaded in the sieve tube elements and it will result in increase in osmolarity of the sieve tube elements. So this what happens, once the sugar enters the sieve tubes, it will increase the turgor pressure. So remember, in mass flow hypothesis, two factors are very, very important. One is the turgor pressure, or it is also called as the hydrostatic pressure, and one more is the osmosis. So these two are important. So here what happens? In the sieve tube elements, osmolarity has been increased. Why osmolarity has increased in the sieve tube elements? Because from the companion cells of the phloem, all the sucrose has travelled into the sieve tube elements of the phloem. Therefore, it has increased the osmolarity of the sieve tube elements. So apart from that, so here osmolarity has increased. So when osmolarity has increased, what happens? It creates a pressure gradient. And it creates a pressure gradient in the neighboring cells. What are the neighboring cells of the phloem? It is the xylem, because we know that in the vascular bundle, phloem as well as xylem will be present, right? Phloem and xylem. So here what happens? When here in the phloem, what are there? There are companion cells. So I'll just draw it here. So this side you can just see. So what is there in the vascular bundle? So say for example, xylem elements are there. The arrangement will be different when compared. So xylem are there, phloem are there. To make you easy understand, I have just drawn it like this. So here, what is there in the phloem cells? Phloem is the food conducting tissue, right? Xylem is the water conducting tissue. Water, this one is food. So food means here we are talking about sucrose, right? So here in phloem, what all are there? So in phloem, companion cells are there. Then there are the sieve tube elements. So from the companion cells, the food is traveling through the sieve tube elements. How did they travel? They travel through a plasmodesmatal connection between the two, right? So here what happened? It is traveling from a region of higher concentration from the companion cells of the phloem to a region of the sieve tubes of the phloem, sieve tube elements. So here what happens? All the sucrose would have entered into the sieve tube elements. Therefore, it has increased the osmolarity of the sieve tube elements. So when the osmolarity of the sieve tube element increase, it creates a pressure gradient in the surrounding cells of the phloem. So those cells surrounding the phloem will be the xylem, which is the water conducting tissue. So here what happens? When a pressure gradient is created on the surrounding cells of the phloem, that is on the xylem, whatever water is there, it will start to enter into the phloem. So therefore, water also starts entering into the phloem. So here, sugar enters into the sieve tube cell, that is the sucrose. They enter into the sieve tube cells, and when it enters into the sieve tube cells, it creates a osmolarity in the sieve tube cells, that is osmolarity, and this will because of the osmolarity, what happens? Those surrounding cells, those xylem cells that are present near the phloem cells, a pressure gradient is created on them. Because of the increase in the pressure gradient, what happens? Water will start to flow by osmosis into the phloem. Water will start entering into the phloem by osmosis process, right? So once water starts entering into the phloem, it creates a turgor pressure. So this actually creates a turgor pressure from the source to the sink. A high turgor pressure will be created from the source to the sink. What is the source? The leaf. From the sink to the sink, that is the one that is receiving the sugar and the water and all that, that is the sieve tube elements, a turgor pressure will be created in the sieve tube elements. So this creates a turgor pressure and it allows the movement of water from the source to the sink. So that is how our movement of sucrose along with water from the source to the sink. So you can see here from the source they will start moving to the sink. That is, sugar will start to leave the sieve tube cells. Why is it leaving the sieve tube cell? So sieve tube cell is the source here. Because of the increase in the turgor pressure, sucrose will leave the source, that is the sieve tube cells, and it will enter into the root cells. Can you see here? They start entering into the root cells. So that is how from the leaf the sucrose moves into the root because of the turgor pressure gradient. So I hope you have understood now. Here you can see the sugar solution starts to move from the leaf into the root. Into the root they will start to move because of the turgor pressure gradient. So that is the movement of the sucrose from the source to the sink. So what happens? I'll tell you again. Here sucrose that is there in the source. What is the source? It is the leaf. In the leaf phloem is there. Phloem is having the companion cells and the sieve tube elements. So sucrose first enters into the companion cells. From the companion cells it travels into the sieve tube elements. So what happens? In the sieve tube elements the concentration of sucrose increases, and therefore what happens? Because of the concentration of sucrose being increased, it results in osmolarity of the sieve tube elements. Because of this, what happens? A pressure gradient is being created in the xylem cells surrounding the phloem. Therefore, from the water from the xylem cells enter into the phloem or the sieve tube elements by osmosis, and therefore in the sieve tube elements what happens? Therefore in the sieve tube elements a turgor pressure is being created. Because of this turgor pressure from the source the food travels, that is the sucrose starts traveling into the root cells. So that is how they travel from the source to the root cells. And because a lot of pressure, that is a turgor pressure, is being involved in this, it is also called as the pressure flow hypothesis. And because the sucrose travels in mass or in bulk, that is why it is also called as the mass flow hypothesis. That is the pressure flow hypothesis and the mass flow hypothesis that was proposed by Munch. So in order to support the pressure flow hypothesis and the mass flow hypothesis, an important experiment was conducted which was called as the Girdling Experiment. So the Girdling Experiment was done in order to identify the tissues exactly through which food is transported. So we came to know that food is transported from the source to the sink. But which are the tissues? We came to know phloem is involved here, wherein the food travels from the companion cells of the phloem into the sieve tube cells of the phloem and then into the root. How exactly, through which all tissues exactly do the food, that is sucrose, travels? In order to find out that, they did the experiment called as the Girdling Experiment. So what they did was, they took a trunk of a tree and then they girdled it. Girdling means removing the bark. So if this is the tree, remove the bark of the tree. Can you see here, this portion, bark was completely removed. Middle portion, the vascular bundles were left as such. Xylem was left as such. Okay. So xylem was left as such. Only the external covering, that is the bark, was removed. So the removal of the bark from the stem of a tree is called as girdling. That is why the experiment is called as Girdling Experiment. So on the trunk of a tree, a ring of bark up to the depth of the phloem was removed. So the ring of the bark along with the phloem was removed so that only the xylem will be retained. And here what happens, since the phloem is removed, will there be downward movement of water? Because I told you only in the phloem there is bidirectional movement of material, right? That is from the source to the sink, and also sometimes the sink will start acting like a source, therefore from the sink to the source, or in other words I can say from the leaf to the root and from the root to the leaf, only in the case of phloem. But xylem is unidirectional. Only the movement of water takes place from the root to the leaves, not from the leaves to the root. So therefore here what happened, because phloem was removed, there was no downward movement of water. Only upward movement was there because only xylem is there. In the absence of downward movement of food, the portion of the bark that was there above the ring, it started to swell after a few weeks. So to make you understand, I can say what they did. This is xylem. It's M, xylem. So here what they did, they removed the bark of the tree. What all they removed? Bark. Along with the bark, they also removed the phloem. So phloem, what it does, so I'll write here, phloem, it helps in the downward movement and also the upward movement of water and food substances. Xylem only helps in the upward movement. So this is the leaf, this is the root. From leaf to root also movement will take place, and from root to leaf also movement will take place. This is leaf, root. Here movement is only from root to leaf. Now here phloem is not there, only xylem is there. Therefore movement is only from root to leaf. So what they did was they put this in a solution. Okay. So here food has to travel, according to Munch-Flow's hypothesis, food has to travel from source. What is the source here? It is the leaf. It has to travel from source to the sink, right? That is the root. It has to travel downwards. But here, can it travel downwards? No. Why? Phloem has been removed. So that is why what happens? Food from source will travel and it will start to collect here because it cannot go further down because phloem is not there. So therefore, the tissue here starts to become swollen. So therefore, they understood that the transport of food is through the phloem. Okay. And then they put water here. Water easily moves upward. Why? Because xylem is enough for transport of water, but phloem is not needed. Okay. So their transport of water easily occurred. So therein they found out that this simple experiment showed that phloem is the tissue responsible for the translocation of food, and that transport takes place in only one direction, that is towards the root. So therefore, by swelling, it was understood that phloem was able to transport the food from the source to the sink, and that food could not travel from the sink to the source. Why? Because here the phloem was removed. Therefore, whatever food got accumulated here resulted in the bulging of this portion of the stem. So therefore, they were able to understand that phloem is the one that actually transported the food, and that transport took place only in one direction, that was towards the root. So therefore, here phloem is the one that actually helps in the transport of the food, but it is not the xylem. Xylem easily helps in the transport of water, but phloem only the food. So that is how they found out using this Girdling experiment. So this was about this particular experiment. So in today's session, we studied how actually the food travels from the source to the sink. We understood based on the mass flow hypothesis, which is also called as the pressure flow hypothesis, which was proposed by a scientist Munch. And to support this experiment, and in order to understand which is the tissue that actually transports the food, the experiment was conducted called as the Girdling experiment, wherein they found out that phloem is the one that actually helps in the transport of the food, and it is usually, because it is bidirectional and because phloem was removed, the food got collected in one particular region, which resulted in swelling of the bark. So therefore, helping us understand that phloem is the one that actually helps in the translocation of the food. So I hope you understood this session well. So with this, we have completed the chapter, that is transport in plants. We shall meet again in the coming sessions, wherein we'll discuss about a new chapter. Thank you.